They thought his father had left him nothing. Just a rotting cabin clinging to the side of a mountain and a sway-backed horse too old to earn its keep. To the people of Oak Hollow, it was a cruel joke, proof that Elias Boone, the poorest cowboy in town, would never escape his fate. But the cabin creaked with secrets, and the horse was not as useless as it seemed. Because one storm-torn night, when Dusty's hooves struck the floorboards again and again, Elias uncovered something buried deep in the mountain, something powerful enough to change his life, and dangerous enough to make men kill for it. And that was only the beginning. Before we dive in, let us know where you're watching from. And if you enjoy this story, don't forget to subscribe. The late summer sun hung low over the dusty road that led into Oak Hollow, throwing long, uneven shadows across the warped planks of its main street. Most days, the town ignored Elias Boone, as if he were just another shadow among them, drifting in and out of sight, without consequence. He was tall but wiry, the kind of man whose frame suggested he had once been built for endurance, but had since been worn down by time and hardship. His skin was darkened by years beneath the sun, and the lines of his face cut deeper than his age would suggest. A scruff of beard clung unevenly to his jaw, untrimmed for weeks, and his clothes-faded trousers, a threadbare cotton shirt and boots with soles nearly gone, announced his poverty before he ever spoke a word. Once, years ago, he had worn the blue of the Union Army. He had carried a rifle across the battlefields that smelled of black powder, and fear marched through mud that swallowed men whole, and watched friends fall faster than the leaves in autumn. When the war ended, he expected to find purpose waiting. Instead, he had found only silence. The skills of a soldier were of little value to a world eager to forget its own brutality. So Elias drifted trading labor for scraps, breaking horses for impatient ranchers, stringing fences for men who would sneer as they handed him a few coins, or shoveling stables in return for a meal. The townsfolk of Oak Hollow had a word for men like him: drifter. They said it with a curl of the lip, as though the syllables themselves carried a stench. To them, Elias Boone was a reminder of failures they wanted to forget, war, ruin, and the promise of lives never fulfilled. He nursed his bitterness at the Golden Spur, a saloon that reeked of spilled whiskey and sweat. Most nights, he could be found at its corner table nursing a bottle of rot gut he could scarcely afford. When the money ran out, the barkeep would toss him onto the street like refuse. And still Elias returned, because the fire of cheap liquor was the only warmth he trusted. It was on one such evening, as the lamplight flickered weakly and the piano sat silent, that a messenger boy burst through the batwing doors, clutching a folded envelope. "Elias Boone?" the boy asked, glancing about. A few ranch hands at the bar chuckled, one muttering, "Try the corner, where else would a Boone be?" But in the shadows, Elias lifted his head, eyes bleary, and extended a rough hand. The boy hesitated before passing him the letter, then hurried out as if contact with Elias might soil him. The envelope bore the neat handwriting of a lawyer's clerk. Elias slid it open with a dirty fingernail. The words within were simple, final: "Abraham Boone, your father has passed. Please attend the reading of his will at the office of Lawson and Fitch, Oak Hollow, on Friday morning." For a moment, Elias stared at the ink, as if it might shift into something else. His father, Abraham Boone, rancher, landowner, a man of granite and iron, was dead. Elias's lips curved not into sorrow, but into a grim smile that never touched his eyes. "Peaceful, they'll say," he muttered into his glass. The old man never did anything peacefully. Memories rose unbidden, a childhood of silence, broken only by orders, the weight of disapproval heavy as chainmail. When Elias returned from war, expecting some measure of acknowledgement, Abraham had merely glanced at him, jaw tight, and gone back to mending a harness. The war had carved a canyon between them that no bridge was ever built to cross. Now the canyon was sealed by death, and Elias felt nothing. Not grief, not relief. Only emptiness, as if a star that had burned too far away to give warmth had finally winked out. 2 days later, the office of Lawson & Fitch smelled faintly of ink dust and polished mahogany. Elias arrived in the same clothes he had worn to the saloon, boots scuffed, shirt collar frayed. He stood in stark contrast to the two figures already seated at the long table. Caleb Boone, his elder brother, wore a suit of dark wool tailored to perfection, a gold watch chain gleaming across his vest. His hair was combed back with oil, and his eyes flicked to the clock every few seconds, as though his time here was being stolen from him. He had built a shipping firm in the East, profiting from the very war that had broken Elias. Beside him sat Isabel Boone, Elias's twin by birth, but not by spirit. She was draped in cream silk, her blonde hair twisted into an elegant knot. An air of cultivated refinement clung to her, and her lips curled in something between pity and disdain as she regarded her brother. To Isabel, Oak Hollow was already a backwater she had escaped. Elias was merely proof of why she had been right to leave. At the head of the table, Lawson, the lawyer, cleared his throat. "We are gathered to read the last will and testament of Colonel Abraham Boone." His voice was dry, efficient. He listed the smaller bequests, first donations to a church, a pension for 2 long-serving ranch hands. Then he moved to the main inheritances. "To my eldest son, Caleb Boone Lawson," intoned, "I leave the sum of $20,000 in trust, together with the deeds to the cattle lands east of Oak Hollow." Caleb's lips curved in satisfaction, though his eyes never left his watch. "To my daughter, Isabel Boone, I leave the family house in Oak Hollow, together with a parcel of cultivated farmland and a trust in the amount of $15,000. Isabel's smile was demure, but her eyes glimmered with triumph. Lawson shuffled the final page. "To my son, Elias Boone." He paused briefly, then read without inflection, "I leave the property located upon Blackthorn Ridge, consisting of 1 wooden cabin and its surrounding acre, together with the horse named Dusty." A silence heavier than lead settled over the room. Caleb barked a laugh, sharp and derisive. A cabin that should have been torn down 20 years ago, and a swayback nag ready for the glue factory fitting. Father always did know how to make a joke. Isabel reached across to touch Caleb's arm, though her voice carried its own blade. "Don't, Caleb. Perhaps it's better this way. Elias isn't suited to more. A simple roof and an old horse, it's what he can manage. You could sell them to us, Elias. We'll give you enough money to keep you in whiskey for the rest of your days." Elias's jaw tightened. His hands clenched, but he said nothing. He kept his gaze fixed on the grain of the table, for if he looked up, he feared the rage in his eyes might betray him. When the proceedings ended, Caleb strode out with his watch already in hand, Isabel trailing like perfume behind him. Elias lingered the weight of humiliation, pressing down like a storm cloud. A shack and a horse. That was his inheritance. Not recognition, not redemption, just the final insult from a father who had never once spoken the words, "I'm proud of you." He left the office without a word, and the stares of townsfolk following him like barbs. Some smirked, others shook their heads, whispering of the fool Boone boy who had been left scraps. Elias walked alone down the main street, boots raising small puffs of dust. Inside, a storm raged, shame, anger, and a gnawing question he could not silence. Why the cabin? Why Dusty? His father had been many things, but never whimsical. If he left those 2 things specifically, there had to be a reason. At the edge of town, he found the livery stable where Dusty was tied. The horse was a patchy roan gray, its mane tangled its back, showing the sway of age. One eye was clouded, a scar across its flank spoke of some old injury. It shifted uneasily as Elias approached, hooves clattering on the packed earth. Elias frowned. "So you're Dusty, the last gift of a man who never gave me anything." The horse turned its head, meeting his gaze with dark, steady eyes. There was no fear in them, only a quiet watchfulness that made Elias pause. For a moment, man and animal regarded each other, and Elias felt an odd stirring in his chest, recognition perhaps, or the faint echo of belonging. He almost turned away, almost left the animal to be sold off or abandoned. But something in those eyes rooted him. With a sigh, he took the reins. "All right, old boy. Seems you and I are bound together, whether we like it or not." Dusty snorted softly, as if in agreement. Together, man and horse walked out of Oak Hollow, and the whispers of the town trailing after them. Beyond the last fence line, the road climbed toward the shadowed outline of Blackthorn Ridge. The cabin awaited a ruin perched on the mountain. To the world it was nothing. To Elias, it was humiliation. And yet somewhere in his bones, he felt the faintest tremor of curiosity. Perhaps, just perhaps, the cabin and the horse carried more than his father's spite. Perhaps they carried a secret. And so, with Dusty at his side and the weight of a lifetime of failure on his shoulders, Elias Boone began the climb toward the inheritance that would change everything. The trail wound higher into the Blackthorn Ridge switchback, after switchback carved into the mountainside by generations of woodcutters and hunters. Elias Boone led Dusty by the reins, his boots crunching against loose shale, each step heavier than the last. Sweat darkened the collar of his shirt, though the evening air had already begun to cool. Behind him, the town of Oak Hollow was shrinking into a patch of light in the valley. Before him, only Pine's granite and silence waited. By the time they reached the cabin, the last rays of daylight clung stubbornly to the jagged horizon. Elias stopped catching his breath and stared at what his father had left him. It was worse than he had imagined. The cabin sat hunched like a wounded animal on the slope, its roof sagging as though the weight of the years had been too much. The shingles were rotted and peeled away, and the chimney leaned at an angle that defied reason. The logs that made up the walls were scarred by weather, where their bark long stripped away, the wood itself warped and gray. The door hung on rusted hinges, and when the wind sighed through the pines, it moaned faintly, as though protesting its own existence. Around the clearing, tall weeds grew unchecked, choking out what might once have been a yard. Briars twisted through the underbrush, clinging to the fence posts that leaned drunkenly toward the earth. A couple of saplings had rooted themselves too close to the cabin's foundation, their roots splitting stone. Elias shook his head and spat into the dirt. "A king's inheritance," he muttered. Dusty stood beside him, the old horse's sides heaving from the climb. The animal's coat was a faded roan, brown streaked with gray, and a hitch in its step suggested a leg that had never healed right. Yet the horse lifted its head now, ears pricked forward, eyes fixed on the cabin, as though it recognized the place. Elias narrowed his eyes at that. "Eyes, don't tell me you're happy to be home," he said. "Looks to me like a grave, waiting to cave in." He tugged the reins, leading Dusty to the warped porch. Each board groaned beneath his weight. The door resisted when he tried it, swollen from rain and years of neglect, then gave way with a sharp squeal of rusted hinges. A smell hit him at once, dust, damp wood, and the faint sourness of mice. He wrinkled his nose and pushed inside. The cabin was a single room, small and suffocating. A few pieces of furniture crouched in the gloom, a table with one leg braced by a stone, 2 chairs with seats sagging like tired backs, a narrow bed frame without mattress. Dust covered everything in a thick gray coat. Cobwebs stretched like drapes across corners, swaying slightly in the draft. On the walls hung rusted tools, a saw, whose teeth were half gone, a cracked lantern, an iron skillet still black with grease from decades past. The floorboards squealed beneath his boots, threatening to give way. Elias stepped carefully, scanning the room with a sinking heart. He had not expected riches, but even his cynical imagination had not conjured this level of ruin. So this is it, he whispered, the bitterness rising in his throat. All those years of silence, of being nothing to you, and this is your parting gift. He dropped his small canvas sack on the table, sending up a puff of dust. For a long moment he stood there staring at the hollow shell of a life once lived. Then his eyes shifted almost without willing toward the cupboard in the corner. It was the pull of habit stronger than reason. In every ruined place he had stumbled into, he had sought one thing, the fire that dulled memory. Elias crossed the room and yanked open the cupboard door. Inside, behind a stack of cracked plates, lay a squat bottle half hidden beneath grime. He pulled it free. The glass was coated with dust, but the cork was still intact. Inside sloshed the faint amber glow of whiskey. He almost laughed. Of course, he muttered. The only thing worth a damn in this place. Setting the bottle on the table, he rummaged for a cup. He found a chipped mug, its handle cracked, but it would serve. He uncorked, the bottle poured, and raised the cup in a mock salute. "Here's to you, Father," he said, voice low and sour. "The one thing you left me that I can use tonight." The whiskey burned down his throat, harsh and fiery, but the familiar warmth began to seep into his chest. For a moment, the silence of the cabin seemed to soften. The ghosts of battlefields and saloon jeers drifted to the edges of his mind. He poured another. He had just lifted the cup when a sound interrupted him. A hollow clop of hooves on the porch. Then the scrape of wood as something heavy pressed against the doorway. Dusty. The horse stepped inside, ducking its head beneath the low lintel. Elias blinked. "What in hell do you think you're doing?" Dusty walked forward slowly, ears forward, gaze locked, not on the room, but on the bottle on the table. Elias lifted the cup again, but as he brought it toward his lips, Dusty moved with sudden decisiveness. The horse swung its head muzzle, striking Elias's hand with a firm bump. The cup jolted, spilling amber liquid across the floorboards. "Damn you," Elias snapped, staggering back. "What's the matter with you, you old nag?" Dusty didn't flinch. The horse stood between Elias and the table, now massive body blocking the whiskey. Its ears stood rigid, eyes gleaming in the half-light. Elias tried to circle around, but Dusty stepped sideways, cutting him off with uncanny precision. Elias barked a laugh, bitter and incredulous. "Are you out of your mind? A horse telling me what I can and can't drink?" He made another attempt, feinting left, then right. Dusty moved with him, calm but immovable like a sentry at post. The whiskey bottle gleamed just beyond reach, but every path to it was barred by muscle and will. For a moment, man and beast stood locked, eyes meeting. Elias expected to see dull animal stubbornness. Instead, what he saw unnerved him. The eyes that met his were clear, steady, almost accusing. His shoulders slumped. He let out a long breath and sank into the nearest chair. Dusty held his ground, not aggressive, not afraid, simply present. Elias rubbed his hands over his face. "You think you're better than me, don't you? You and him both. Always telling me what I can't do." But the horse didn't move, didn't judge, only watched. The evening light slanted through the cracks in the cabin wall, catching motes of dust that swirled like tiny ghosts. Elias sat in silence, his anger draining away, leaving something raw behind. For years he had been invisible to people. To Caleb, a failure. To Isabel, an embarrassment. To his father, a disappointment unworthy of words. No one had stood between him and the bottle. No one had cared enough to try. Now here was this old horse standing guard over him, as if his life mattered. He lowered his head voice barely above a whisper. Maybe you've got more sense than all of them. Maybe you're the only one that gives a damn. Dusty flicked his ears, then shifted just enough to block the bottle again, as Elias's eyes strayed toward it. Elias almost smiled. For the first time in years, laughter not bitter, not mocking, but real rose faintly in his chest. It startled him. He reached out, brushing his hand along Dusty's neck. The horse leaned into the touch, warm and solid. The whiskey sat untouched on the table as the last light drained from the sky. The cabin was still broken, the world still harsh, but something had shifted. A crack had opened in the walls Elias had built around himself. In the gathering dark, the cowboy and the old horse sat together in the ruin of a cabin, bound not by blood nor by choice, but by an understanding as strange as it was undeniable. The wind came screaming down from the high ridges that night, rattling the old cabin like dice in a gambler's cup. The shutters clattered against the warped frame hinges, whining in protest, and the whole structure seemed to shift with each gust. Elias Boone lay stretched out on the sagging bed, staring at the rafters where shadows darted and danced with every flicker of the lantern. Sleep had eluded him from the start. He had fought in storms before camped through tempests on the march, but mountain wind was different. It moaned through every crack and crevice, carrying with it a kind of lonely voice. The sound pulled him back to places he'd tried hard to bury nights on the front line when the cannons had fallen silent, and the waiting was worse than the battle. Nights when he'd listened to the moans of the wounded drifting in the darkness and wondered if dawn would ever come. He turned restlessly, muttering curses under his breath, but the past would not release him. Every creak of timber, every rattle of loose shingles felt like echoes of rifles cocking in the dark. Dusty was unsettled too. The old horse had insisted on coming inside when the first gusts hit, pushing past Elias with stubborn determination. Now in the cramped space, the animal paced in a slow circle, hooves thudding softly against the boards. Every so often he tossed his head, snorted, then paused to paw at the floor with sharp insistence. "Lie down, damn it," Elias grumbled from the bed. "I've had enough ghosts howling at me without you starting up." Dusty ignored him. The horse circled again and stopped near the far wall. His hoof struck the planks once, twice, again and again, always the same spot. Elias sat up, irritation burning through his fatigue. "You're driving me mad," he snapped. "Sleep, you old mule. I've got misery enough without your racket." But Dusty didn't stop. His hoof came down with stubborn rhythm, the sound a dull drum beat that merged with the moan of the wind. His eyes flashed in the lantern glow, unwavering, as though he were trying to speak without words. Something in that gaze froze Elias, halfway between anger and unease. He swung his legs off the bed feet, meeting the cold floor. "Fine," he muttered. "Let's see what the devil you're after." Lantern in hand, he crossed the room. Dusty stepped back just enough to give him space, then nudged the boards with his nose, blowing warm breath across the floor. Elias knelt the lamplight, revealing what the horse had already sensed. One board sat slightly higher than the rest, its edges warped, a faint gap running along the seam. His pulse quickened. He told himself it was nothing wood swollen by years of damp. Still, he slid his knife from his belt, wedging the blade into the crack. He levered, grunting as the nails squealed in protest. At last, with a splintering pop, the plank lifted. The smell that rose up was ancient dust leather and something metallic. Elias tilted the lantern closer. Beneath the loosened board yawned a hollow space deeper than he expected. And inside that dark cavity rested a chest, small, rectangular, its wood blackened by age, its corners bound in cracked leather. A band of iron encircled it, the lock rusted but intact. For a moment, Elias just stared, breath caught in his throat. His father's last insult had been a cabin and a horse. But perhaps there was more, something he had never been meant to see. His hands trembled slightly as he dragged the box into the open. Dust and cobwebs clung to it in thick gray layers. He ran his thumb across the lid, tracing grooves worn by time, and felt his heart hammering harder than it had since battle. "Hell," he whispered. "What did you hide, old man?" The lock looked fragile. Elias set the chest on the table, braced his knife against the hasp, and struck with the heel of his hand. The brittle iron gave way with a sharp crack. The lid creaked open, releasing a musty breath of trapped years. Inside lay not trash, nor the trinkets of a bitter old man, but objects arranged with military neatness. First, a folded sheet of heavy parchment, a hand-drawn map. Elias spread it across the table, brushing dust aside. The lines were rough, but deliberate, depicting the Blackthorn Ridge with ridges, gullies, and valleys sketched in a steady hand. Toward the far end of the range, where cliffs cut jagged against the sky, a bold X had been drawn. Next, a key, heavy wrought iron, its surface spotted with rust. The bow of the key was not the simple circle of a house key, but carved in an odd pattern, almost a sigil, two crossing lines within a circle, etched deep enough that even time had not erased them. Elias held it up to the lantern, the shadows magnifying the strange mark. Last was a small book bound in cracked brown leather, its clasp stiff but not locked. He pried it open. The pages were yellowed and brittle-covered, not with the straightforward script of ranch ledgers, but with strange jumbled writing. Letters and numbers arranged in rows and clusters, sometimes overlapping, sometimes broken with symbols. Elias frowned, turning pages slowly. It was a code. He had seen such things during the warfield, ciphers, encrypted dispatches meant to confuse enemy eyes. But these pages carried no headings, no orders, only the relentless, meticulous hand of his father. The words swam before him until, in the midst of the chaos, fragments leapt out. A word here, another there, English peeking through the storm of symbols. Vein, survey, claim. His mouth went dry. He turned another page. There it was again, repeated with obsessive frequency: vein. And once more, claim. Then a phrase broken but clear enough: door in the stone only opened with a key. He sank back into the chair, staring at the map of the key, the cryptic journal. Could it be true? Could Abraham Boone, the man who had spoken to him only in commands and reproaches, have guarded a secret like this all his life? A hidden vein of gold in the Blackthorn Ridge? The thought was absurd, and yet... He rubbed a hand over his face, half laughing, half groaning. So this is it, Father, a final joke. You hide a box in the floor and leave me chasing dreams. The cabin gave no answer. But Dusty stepped forward, pressing his muzzle against the chest, snorting softly, as if to confirm what Elias could not bring himself to believe. The horse lifted his head, then eyes steady on Elias, calm but insistent. Elias shook his head. You think it's real, don't you? Damn me, but you actually think it's real. The wind howled outside, rattling the shutters, but inside the cabin, another kind of storm had broken loose. For the first time in years, Elias felt the sharp cut of possibility, not of drink, not of drifting, but of something waiting in the mountains, a truth buried with his father's silence, marked with an X on an old map, and guarded somehow by the only companion left to him. He closed the journal gently, set the key beside it, and let his hand rest on the cracked leather cover. The bitterness that had filled him since Oak Hollow stirred, twisted, then shifted into something he had nearly forgotten a purpose. Dusty stamped once against the floor, as though sealing an agreement. Elias looked up at the horse and allowed himself a grim smile. "All right, old boy," he said softly. "If there's a secret in these mountains, we'll find it. You and me." The lantern flickered shadows crawling over the cabin walls. Outside, the storm raged. Inside, beneath the thin roof of a ruin, a broken man and an aging horse stood at the edge of something neither could yet name. But the first clue had been found, and there would be no turning back. For 3 nights, Elias Boone sat hunched over the table in the ruined cabin, the lantern guttering low as smoke curled up to the rafters. The old journal lay open before him, its pages filled with the strange ciphers his father had scratched in neat rows decades before. At first, the marks were nonsense, just a wall of numbers and crooked letters. But as the hours passed and the silence pressed in, his soldier's patience returned. Piece by piece, fragment by fragment, words began to emerge like bones from shallow earth. Vein, claim, survey. And again, always in repetition, the door in the stone only opened with the key. The map matched what he knew of the Blackthorn Ridge. And there, marked with a heavy hand, was an X deep within a gorge Elias had never dared to ride. By the time dawn cracked pale over the horizon, he pushed back from the table, eyes aching, heart pounding. "So it's real," he whispered into the quiet. The old man wasn't just burying his demons. When the morning came, full, Elias gathered what little he owned. A coil of rope, his knife a lantern with a spare flask of oil, and a pouch of dried meat. He slung them across his shoulder and cinched the strap tight. Dusty stamped impatiently outside, as if sensing the purpose already coursing through his rider. "Easy, boy," Elias muttered, running a hand through the coarse mane. "You've known the way all along, haven't you?" The horse snorted, ears pricked forward, muscles twitching with restless energy. They set out as the sun crested the ridge. The trail was no easy road, but a cruel path hacked by storms and neglect. Loose stones skittered beneath Elias's boots, and often he had to dismount, leading Dusty carefully up the steeper climbs. Pines grew twisted and sparse at that height, their roots clutching at rock like desperate fingers. Above, cliffs cut jagged against the sky, and shadows lingered in places where the sun rarely reached. As they wound upward, Elias's mind wandered. He remembered being a boy, trailing behind his father, who never slowed his long stride to match his son's. He remembered the silence at the supper table, the weight of expectation pressing heavier than any yoke. "Damn you," Elias muttered to the wind. "Even in death you drive me up mountains." The gorge swallowed them by midday. Towering cliffs rose sheer on either side, the path narrowing to a wound in the earth. The air turned cold, the sun vanishing into a thin strip far above. Wind funneled through the canyon, carrying with it a hollow moan that sounded unnervingly like voices whispering at the edge of hearing. Dusty hesitated, ears flicking. "I hear it too," Elias admitted, gripping the lantern, though it wasn't yet lit. "Like the ridge itself is warning us away." They pressed on. Finally, after hours of careful climbing, they reached the place marked on the map. Elias stopped short. Before him stood a wall of stone, smooth and unbroken, as though some giant had carved it with a single cut of a blade. No cave mouth, no hollow, only impenetrable rock. He cursed softly. So, that's it then. A fool's chase. But Dusty moved forward, lowering his head to sniff along the base of the wall. With a sudden stomp, he struck a hoof against a narrow fissure running up from the ground. The sound echoed oddly, not like solid stone, but something deeper, hollow. Dusty stamped again and Wickard's softly eyes, flicking toward Elias. Elias crouched, lantern raised. There, within the crack, almost hidden metal glinted dully. His breath caught. Reaching in his fingers, brushed cold iron. A keyhole. Slowly, with a hand that shook despite himself, he drew the rusted key from his pouch. The carved sigil on its bow seemed to shimmer in the dim light, as if it had been waiting all this time. He slid it into the hole. It fit perfectly. He hesitated. "Father," he whispered, "if this is another of your trials, you've won. I'm already broken." Then he turned the key. A deep, resonant click rolled through the stone. Dust sifted down. The ground trembled beneath his boots. Then, with a grinding groan, a slab of rock the size of a wagon door shuddered and slowly swung inward. Cold air rushed out, smelling of earth iron and secrets. Elias stepped back, heart thundering. Dusty tossed his head, but did not retreat. Together, they faced the dark mouth that had appeared where no opening had been. God above Elias breathed. "So this is what you left me." Lantern-lit rope coiled at his side, he ducked inside. The passage ran only a short way before opening into a chamber cut into the heart of the mountain. The air was thick damp, carrying the weight of years. Elias lifted the lantern high, and light spilled across rough-hewn walls. His breath caught. Along the walls stood shelves cobbled from pine, their boards sagging under the burden of sacks, split open with age. From the torn seams spilled nuggets of raw gold, their dull gleam catching the flame like captive suns. Piles of ore glittered where they had been left to crumble. Elias staggered closer, lifting a handful of rock shot through with veins of precious metal. It was real. More wealth than he had ever imagined lay within arm's reach. In the corner leaned rusting picks, shovels, and lanterns, abandoned tools of a life spent digging in silence. And at the chamber's center, on a small wooden table scarred by time, sat bundles of parchment wrapped in leather, sealed once with red wax, now faded to brown. Elias set down the lantern and reached with reverence he did not know he possessed. His fingers brushed the papers, pulling free one bundle. He unrolled it slowly. By the light, the words stared back: claim of ownership, Blackthorn Ridge. Survey of mining rights. His knees nearly gave. This was no hidden stash of a desperate prospector. These were legal documents, stamped and recognized deeds that placed the land and its wealth squarely in the hands of Abraham Boone. Which meant they belonged by law to Elias now. He let out a strangled laugh, half awe, half disbelief. "You old bastard," he said, voice shaking. "You did it. All those years, all that silence, and this is what you guarded." He dropped into the rickety chair by the table head in his hands. The gold was staggering, yes, but it was not the gleam that stunned him. It was the proof. Proof that his father had not been clinging to nothing. Proof that Boone land was Boone land indeed. When he looked up again, Dusty had followed him into the chamber. The horse stood calm and watchful, ears, pricked eyes bright with something Elias could almost mistake for pride. "You knew," Elias murmured. "All this time you carried him here. And now you've carried me." His gaze drifted back to the papers. Among them, tucked with care, was a single envelope, sealed though the wax had cracked. His heart lurched. The handwriting was unmistakable, sharp, disciplined strokes he had seen on every ledger his father had ever kept. With trembling fingers, Elias broke the seal. The paper inside was yellowed, the ink faded but still legible. He read slowly, each word striking deeper than any bullet ever had. If you are reading this, my son, then you have found what I spent my life guarding. Know first the gold you see is no gift, but a burden. It has destroyed men stronger than me. Wealth is fire, it warms when controlled, but devours when fed without restraint. Elias swallowed hard on his stinging. The true treasure is not the ore, but the land itself. This ridge is boon land bought with sweat and guarded with silence. It is our duty to keep it whole, to shield it from the greedy hands that circle always. I leave it to you because you understand hardship. You know the weight of loss. You will not squander it. The words blurred for a moment as Elias blinked back moisture. He forced himself to continue. You will be tested. Others will come. They will tempt, threaten, and strike. But remember, the strength of a boon has never been in guns or in fists, but in honesty and in the courage to stand when standing seems impossible. At the bottom, scrawled more hastily than the rest, I was not a good father to you. Perhaps this is the only way I knew to show faith. Do better than me, Elias. Guard this place, and it will guard you. The lantern light trembled as Elias lowered the letter, his hands unsteady. For years, he had told himself his father cared nothing for him, that the silence was contempt. And perhaps it had been. Yet here in ink that had survived the years was something else. A trust, a plea, and in its roughest way, a blessing. He drew a shaky breath, looking around at the cavern glittering with his inheritance. The gold glowed, but it was the letter that weighed heaviest in his hands. Dusty stepped forward, pressing his muzzle against Elias's shoulder. The cowboy reached up, gripping the horse's mane, grounding himself against the tide of emotion. Damn you, old man. Elias' whispered voice, hoarse. You finally found a way to speak. For the first time in longer than he could remember, he felt not bitterness, but a raw, aching thread of connection. The mountain had opened, and so too had something long locked within him. The days that followed the discovery in the mountain blurred into a strange, taut quiet. Elias Boone rose each morning, with the sun tended to dusty cut firewood, and walked the ridge as if nothing had changed. To the eye of any passing hunter, he was the same lanky drifter with his threadbare shirt and weary face. Yet every time he closed the cabin door behind him, he carried the weight of what lay hidden in the stone sacks of ore deeds written in his father's hand, and a letter that spoke to him across the grave. He tried to keep it locked inside. The fewer who knew, the safer it was. But secrecy in a small mountain town is like smoke from a chimney. Try as one might, it will find its way into the air. It began with the woodcutters. Two men tramping down the gorge one afternoon spotted Elias leading Dusty along a narrow trail. He carried rope oil and tools, and his eyes were set in that fixed, far-off look of a man who knows his path. They said nothing to him, but by the time they reached the valley, their tongues loosened over mugs of beer. Boone's been prowling up the ridge, one whispered. Always to the same canyon. He ain't cutting timber, and he ain't hunting neither. By nightfall, the golden spur was buzzing. Someone claimed they'd seen Elias's shirt glittering faint with gold dust. Another swore Dusty's saddlebags sagged heavier than it should. By the second day, the words had twisted into certainty. Boone struck gold. Men leaned closer over their drinks, eyes narrowing with envy. Women at the well shook their heads and clucked their tongues. The drifter who had been the town's shadow was suddenly its spark. Every time Elias rode in to buy flour or lamp oil, heads turned, voices dropped, and the weight of 100 curious stares pressed against him. He answered none of them. His face remained carved from stone, his words few and clipped. He would buy what he needed, pay in coins that rattled too loudly in his pocket, and leave. Yet his silence did not kill the rumors, it fed them like dry tinder, hungrily swallowing sparks. The letters arrived within a week. The first came by a hired writer, clean paper sealed with the Boone crest. Elias broke it open on the cabin porch, Dusty grazing in the weeds nearby. The script was precise, calculated Caleb's hand. "Brother," it began, "we have heard troubling news. It seems father, in his stubbornness, left you with certain responsibilities. You are not a man trained in business, nor one suited for the management of land or resources. I offer you this cell, your share to me. I will manage it wisely as I have managed every Boone enterprise these many years. You will be compensated generously, and you may at last live comfortably free of burden." The words dripped with condescension. Elias read them twice, jaw tight, then crumpled the sheet into a ball and tossed it into the hearth. The flames licked greedily at the fine paper, reducing his brother's careful scrawl to ash. 2 days later, another letter came. The envelope perfumed faintly, even through its rough handling. Isabel's words were softer, but no less sharp. "Dearest Elias," she wrote, "I worry for you. That cabin on the mountain is no place for a man to make a future. You have no family, no wife, no standing. That land is a chain around your neck. Sell it, brother. Let Caleb and me shoulder the responsibility. Take the money, start anew. Don't cling to a ruin out of pride. You deserve better than that place, and you know it." Elias fed that one to the fire as well, watching the edges curl and blacken. His father's words echoed louder than theirs. Keep the land. Do not let the greedy swallow it. When the messenger lingered at his door, hinting that there might be arrangements or private incentives, Elias only said, cold and flat, "Tell them this land is not for sale." The man swallowed hard, nodded, and rode off into the dusk. But Boone blood was not the only blood that scented profit. Silas McGraw had built his empire from dust and sweat, buying up ranches until his cattle grazed from one horizon to the other. He was a man used to getting what he wanted, and when the whisper of gold reached his ears, it stirred something darker than curiosity. He came himself one afternoon, riding not alone, but with 2 shadows at his back, Jed, a barrel of a man with fists like stones, and Carl, lanky, sharp-eyed, with the twitchy hands of one who always reached for his knife too quickly. Their horses climbed the ridge with practiced ease, and when they crested the last rise, Elias was already waiting on the porch, Dusty at his side. Silas was thick through the shoulders, his coat of fine leather stretched tight. A heavy mustache bristled above a mouth set in a smile that never reached his eyes. He dismounted with a grunt, boots striking the dirt like hammers. "Well, well," he drawled, voice gravelly from years of whiskey and cigars. "Boone's boy in Boone's shack. I hear you've been busy up here." Elias didn't rise from his chair. He simply met the man's gaze, saying nothing. Silas chuckled, spreading his arms, as though to embrace the whole mountain. "Don't get me wrong, son. I respect a man who works. But some things are too big for one pair of hands. Land like this, treasure like this, it needs management, guidance." He snapped his fingers, and Carl stepped forward, placing a bulging leather pouch on the porch rail. It landed with a heavy thud. When Silas loosened the tie, the mouth gaped open to reveal gleaming ingots, their weight undeniable. Gold Silas said simply, "Yours to keep. And there's plenty more where that came from. Sign the land over to me, and you'll live easy the rest of your days. No work, no worry. Just a man and his bottle if that's how you want it." Elias's eyes dropped to the pouch, then lifted again. Slowly, deliberately, he pushed it back toward Carl. His voice when he spoke was iron. "You're wasting your time. This land isn't for sale." The silence that followed was heavy. Jed shifted the boards, creaking under his weight. Silas's smile faltered, then hardened into a line. "You don't understand," he said, his tone dropping to a growl. "Around here, when I want something, I get it, one way or another." Behind him, Jed cracked his knuckles. Carl's fingers brushed the hilt of his knife. The air thickened. Then Dusty let out a piercing whinny, stamping forward until he stood between Elias and the men. His ears were back, his muscles tense, eyes blazing with fierce warning. The sound cut through the standoff like a blade. Silas's lips curled into something colder than a smile. So even the horse stands guard, touching. He tugged his gloves back on, turned, and swung into his saddle. "Keep your little cabin, Boone, for now. But remember what I said, everything on this ridge comes to me in the end." With that, he jerked his reins. Jed and Carl followed their horses, stirring up a storm of dust as the trio vanished down the trail, leaving the cabin in uneasy stillness. Elias sat long into the evening, the fire crackling low, his father's letters spread before him on the table. His hand rested on the parchment, as if to draw strength from the words written there. "Hold the land. Do not let the greedy swallow it." He whispered the vow aloud, his voice steady, though his chest ached with the weight of it. "They'll come with letters, with lies, with gold, with knives. Let them. I'll not yield. This ridge stays Boone land." The wind rattled the shutters, and Dusty stood at the doorway, silent sentinel, his dark eyes never leaving his master. Elias drew in a long breath, squared his shoulders, and fed more wood to the fire. The path ahead was no longer just inheritance. It was a fight. And though he knew it would bring danger, he felt the first true clarity of purpose in years. The storm had only begun to gather. The cabin sat quiet under a moonless sky, a lone silhouette clinging to the flank of Blackthorn Ridge. A hush had fallen over the land that night, a hush so complete it pressed against the ears like a weight. The trees along the slope swayed in the faint wind, their limbs scraping like whispers. But otherwise, the mountain seemed to hold its breath. Inside, Elias Boone felt that silence in his bones. Ever since Silas McGraw had ridden up with his two shadows, Elias had lived in a state of taut vigilance. The pouch of gold the rancher had laid on his porch still seemed to echo in the room, though Elias had shoved the memory of it away. He trusted McGraw as much as he trusted a rattler in his boot. So every evening as the sun sank, he placed his revolver and the short-handled axe within arm's reach. He kept the journal open before him, lantern-low eyes scanning the coded pages, while his ears listened for any sound out of place. That night, the cabin fire crackled low, the shadows jumping across rough-hewn logs. Elias sat at the table, brow furrowed over his father's journal, tracing the cryptic markings with a calloused finger. He'd long since given up believing he could sleep peacefully on nights like this. There was something in the stillness beyond the windows that gnawed at his instincts. On the porch, Dusty rested with his legs folded beneath him, head stretched long toward the dirt. He looked at ease, but Elias knew better. One ear twitched toward the forest. The old horse's eyes half-lidded, never fully closed. Elias pushed back from the table, rubbing his eyes. The flames hissed, eating through the last knot of pine. He thought of his father's words in the letter, the vow he had made to guard the land. It gave him strength, yes, but also a weight that settled heavy on his shoulders. He muttered to himself, voice rough in the quiet, "They'll come sure as sunrise. Men like McGraw don't take no for an answer." The wind moaned once through the cracks of the shutter, and the lantern's flame bent sideways as if bowing to it. Elias straightened hand, falling automatically to the revolver. For a moment there was only silence again, Then, a sound. Faint. The delicate scrape of iron against iron. A hinge complaining under an unfamiliar hand. Dusty's ears snapped upright. His head shot up, nostrils flaring. Then the horse gave a sharp, piercing whinny that split the night wide open. Elias was on his feet in an instant, the chair toppling back. He snatched the revolver with one hand, the axe with the other, and turned toward the rear of the cabin. The door shuddered. A hinge popped. And then, the darkness poured inside. Jed was the first through broad shoulders, filling the doorway, the glint of steel in his fist. Behind him slid Carl, lean and wiry, carrying a pry bar that gleamed in the firelight. Their faces were masks of intent, no hesitation. No fear, just the cold certainty of men who had broken into houses before. Elias didn't fire. Every instinct from his years in uniform screamed at him to hold the shot. A gun was final. A gun was loud. It was his last card, not his first. Instead, he swung the axe up, catching the knife with its steel head in a spray of sparks. The two men crashed into the small room boots, thudding, breath hot with whiskey. Shadows leapt madly as the firelight danced over them. Jed growled low, shoving forward with brute force. Elias gave ground boots, skidding across the planks. Their weapons locked, the sound of grinding steel filling the cabin. Carl lunged for the table, the journal and papers spread there. But Dusty came thundering through the open door, his hooves striking the porch and then the boards of the cabin floor. He slammed shoulder first into Carl with such force the man stumbled sideways, smashing against the wall. The pry bar clattered to the floor. "Get the papers," Jed barked, teeth bared. Elias drove a fist into his jaw. The big man staggered, knife slipping from his hand. Elias slammed the axe handle into his chest, forcing him back. Jed cursed, spittle flying, and swung wildly. Carl recovered, grabbing for his bar again. Dusty reared, striking with a foreleg. His hoof clipped Carl's shoulder, sending him sprawling across the broken chair. The horse's scream filled the cabin, a raw sound of fury that rattled the shutters. Elias seized the moment, stooping to snatch his revolver from where it had fallen. He leveled it at Jed, breath, heaving, eyes blazing. "Enough," he roared. Jed froze, his chest, heaving eyes, darting between the muzzle and the horse, stamping barely an arm's length away. Carl crawled backward, clutching his shoulder, eyes wide with pain. "You boys picked the wrong cabin," Elias growled. "Now get out before I spill your blood on these boards." The fire popped, casting sparks into the tense silence. For one heartbeat, no one moved. Then Carl scrambled to his feet, dragging Jed by the sleeve. They backed toward the door, muttering curses, their eyes never leaving the barrel of Elias's gun. Dusty snorted, stamping hard once more, as though to punctuate the order. The intruders bolted into the night, vanishing into the trees as quickly as they had come. The aftermath was a ruin. The table lay on its side, one leg splintered. The back door hung crooked on its last hinge. A smear of blood trailed across the floorboards where Carl had stumbled. Elias stood in the center of it, all revolvers still raised, chest rising and falling like a bellows. Slowly, he lowered the weapon. The strength drained from him all at once. He sank onto the edge of the bed, shoulders sagging, sweat dripping from his brow. Dusty remained by his side, nostrils flaring, his flanks dark with sweat, though his eyes shone sharp and alive. Elias noticed a scrape across the horse's shoulder where Carl's bar had glanced. He reached out, hand steadying on Dusty's neck. "You saved my hide again, old boy," he whispered hoarsely. The horse blinked slowly, as though in answer, and lowered his head until his muzzle brushed Elias's arm. Elias stared at the shattered door, the broken furniture, the dark smear of blood. His father's warning echoed in his mind louder than ever. They will tempt, they will threaten, they will strike. Tonight had proved it. This wasn't about whispers of gold or idle greed. This was war. Silas McGraw and his men were willing to burn, to steal, to kill, if that's what it took. Elias closed his eyes, exhaustion and rage pulling at him in equal measure. "They won't stop," he murmured. "Not until one of us is dead." Dusty snorted softly, the sound steady grounding. Elias opened his eyes again, the firelight catching in his gaze. "They'll find I'm not as easy a mark as they think," he said quietly, almost to himself. The cabin creaked around him, battered but still standing. And in that battered shell, among splintered wood and scattered ash, a line had been drawn. The morning after the raid dawned thin and gray, the mountain air sharp as a blade. Elias Boone rose from his cot with muscles stiff and bruises blooming beneath his shirt. He touched the welt along his ribs, a reminder of Jed's shoulder and Carl's pry bar, and winced. His cabin bore worse scars, the back door half hanging from its hinges, splintered boards littering the floor, furniture cracked and skewed. Dusty stood outside in the pale light steam rising from his nostrils, eyes steady, as if to say, "We held our ground. We're still here." But the ridge no longer felt safe. He knew Silas McGraw would not let a failed raid be the end of it. Men like him never backed down. They circled closer with each attempt until the prey was exhausted. Still, Elias had repairs to make, supplies to fetch. A man could not live on suspicion alone. By mid-morning, he had saddled Dusty and headed down into Oak Hollow. The town greeted him not with warmth, but with the buzz of whispers that chased him from the livery to the mercantile. Faces leaned close, words hissed in low tones. His bruises did not go unnoticed, nor did the stiffness in his gait. "That's Boone," someone murmured outside the Golden Spur. "Got into a scrap last night, they say." "Thought he was just a drifter," another voice answered. "Now he's guarding gold up there, sure as sunrise." Elias ignored them, jaw tight, as he stepped into the general store. He gathered Nail's lantern oil and planks to mend the damage his silence as sharp as any blade. When he laid the goods on the counter, he felt eyes on him. Clara Mayfield stood near the shelves of flour, her gloved hands folded neatly in front of her. The minister's daughter was a quiet figure in town, known for her kind eyes and her stubborn streak when it came to defending the downtrodden. She approached without hesitation, her skirt brushing softly against the worn floorboards. "Mr. Boone," she said gently, "I heard talk this morning. Folks say you caused trouble at your cabin. Is it true?" Elias's shoulders stiffened. For a heartbeat, he considered brushing her off, offering the same curt silence he gave everyone else. But her gaze held him level and unwavering. He let out a slow breath. "I didn't cause trouble," he said at last, voice low and edged. "I defended myself." Something softened in her expression, but she didn't look away. Instead, she nodded once firmly, as though she had already known the truth. "Then you did right. Don't let their chatter weigh on you. You must hold fast." Elias frowned wary. Easy for townsfolk to say. They think I'm some fool clinging to rotten boards and empty land. Clara's eyes glimmered with quiet conviction. Sometimes the Lord chooses the ones least expected to guard what matters most. The ones the world calls worthless, He calls necessary. She let the words hang there, simple yet solid, like stones laid into the foundation of a house. For the first time in years, Elias felt the tight knot in his chest loosen, if only a little. He inclined his head, muttering, "You're the first in this town to say you believe me." "I don't just believe," Clara said softly. "I trust. Don't sell Elias. Whatever McGraw promises, you don't let him take what your father left." Then she turned, gathering her parcels, and slipped out into the morning sun. Elias stood frozen a long moment, the echoes of her words striking deeper than he cared to admit. By afternoon, he had guided Dusty to the smithy on the edge of town. The forge roared sparks, dancing like fireflies in daylight. Elias leaned on the hitching rail while the blacksmith fetched his tools. The old boards creaked under Dusty's hooves. Lord above a voice rasped nearby. I'd know that horse anywhere. Elias turned. An old man with a bent back and a beard white as cotton leaned against a cane, his eyes bright despite their age. Jeremiah Cutter, the miner folks simply called Old Jeremiah, had spent half a lifetime chasing veins through these hills, and the mountain dust had never quite left his skin. You're Boone's boy, Jeremiah said, studying Elias with a mixture of curiosity and memory. And that there, well, that's Dusty, ain't it? Same horse your pa rode when he went up into the ridge. Elias's hand stilled on the reins. You knew my father, Jeremiah chuckled, a sound dry as gravel. Knew of him, sure. Hard man, your pa, but I saw him enough times. Many a morning I watched him ride out with a box strapped to Dusty's back. Heavy thing near bent the animal's knees. Never let no one follow. Always took the same trail up into Blackthorn. Elias's heart thumped once hard. A box? What kind? The old miner shrugged. Wooden chest bound with leather straps. Looked like it held the world itself. Folks asked, but he never answered. Only that horse knew the path he took. Dusty carried him sure as if the mountain spoke to him. The words hit Elias like a revelation. His mind flew back to the night Dusty had pawed the cabin floor, insisting until the hidden compartment was revealed. To the canyon trail the horse had taken without hesitation, to the stone door and the lock that had opened as if waiting. It had not been chance, not luck. His father had meant for the horse to be his compass, his partner. The truth came not from cryptic pages, but from living flesh. Jeremiah tapped his cane against the dirt. Whatever he hid up there, son, it weren't meant for the likes of McGraw. Don't you let go of it. That ridge holds Boone blood and Boone blood alone. Elias swallowed the weight of the man's words, settling deep. He nodded slowly. Thank you, Jeremiah. More than you know. The old miner tipped his hat, his eyes shining with something like respect, and shuffled away. The ride back up the ridge was long, but Elias hardly noticed the distance. His thoughts churned with Clara's quiet faith and Jeremiah's revelation. For years he had believed he stood alone, a man cut loose from family, scorned by neighbors, with only his horse to keep him company. Now, for the first time, he felt the faint spark of something else, support, trust, the weight of allies beside him. That night, as firelight licked the cabin walls, Elias sat with the journal open, but unread. His gaze drifted instead to Dusty, who stood near the door, tail swishing slowly, eyes steady. Elias reached across the rough wood of the table and let his hand rest on the horse's mane. Seems I ain't as alone as I thought, he murmured. Clara believes. Jeremiah knows. And you, he gave the mane a gentle tug. You've been with me all along, haven't you? Dusty snorted softly, leaning into the touch. Elias smiled faintly, the expression strange and unfamiliar on his weathered face. For the first time in many months, the silence inside the cabin felt less like exile and more like shelter. But safety was an illusion, fleeting as morning mist. Later that night, the wind shifted. Elias sat up in bed listening. From the darkness beyond the window came a sound distant, rhythmic, the drumming of hooves on packed earth. He rose, hand to his revolver, peering through the narrow crack in the shutter. Far below, along the tree line at the base of the ridge, faint points of light flickered. Torches, moving, weaving, pausing, as if men searched for a trail. Shadows crossed the fire-glow riders, circling like wolves that had caught scent of blood. Elias's jaw tightened. He buckled his belt, slid the revolver home, and pulled the axe from its place by the door. Then he stepped out onto the porch. The night was cold, stars sharp as steel overhead. Dusty stirred from his rest ears, pricking toward the glow in the distance. "They're watching," Elias said quietly. His breath clouded in the air, circling, waiting for me to stumble. The horse answered with a low, steady whicker. Elias reached to pat his neck. "Not this time. They think I'm still that drifter they could push aside. But I've got a reason now. I've got allies." He glanced back toward the cabin, toward the journal and letter that lay inside. "And I've got you." He spent the next hours tightening the door frame, resetting the bar across the window, rigging small snares and alarms from his soldiering days. Each task was done with deliberate care, fueled not by fear, but by determination. If Silas wanted war, then Elias would meet him on his own ground. When at last he settled beside the fire again, the torches had vanished, swallowed by the dark forest. Yet the memory of them lingered, a reminder that danger still prowled the mountain. Elias lay down with Dusty close by the crackle of the fire, steady in his ears, and whispered into the shadows, "Let them come. This time, I'll be ready." The afternoon was sharp with wind. Elias Boone swung his axe behind the cabin, splitting logs into neat halves, the blows ringing out steady and sure. Each crack of wood was an answer to his unease, a rhythm to drown out the weight pressing on his mind. Dusty grazed nearby, head bent low over tufts of late-season grass at the edge of the tree-lined tail, flicking lazily against the gnats. Elias paused, drawing his sleeve across his brow. He glanced at Dusty, the horse's gray and brown coat shimmering faintly under the autumn light. There was comfort in that sight, in knowing the animal had stood beside him through fire and shadow. But comfort can be fragile. From the brush at the forest's edge, two shapes crouched low. Jed and Carl McGraw's men crept forward with the caution of wolves closing on prey. In Jed's hand was a sack of apples that their skins rubbed with a sheen that caught the light. Carl had soaked them in laudanum, a tincture of opium mixed with spirits enough to fell a man, let alone a tired old horse. Dusty lifted his head, ears twitching. He eyed them warily, nostrils flaring. Yet when the first apple rolled across the ground and landed near his hooves, its sweetness carried on the breeze. He snorted once, pawed at the earth, and bent to take it. Elias' back turned, swung the axe again. Dusty chewed lips, curling to take the second, then the third. His movement slowed. His stance shifted, wobbling. He tried to steady himself, muscles quivering under his weight. The world tilted and his knees buckled. Jed moved fast. The thump of a rope loop filled the air as he flung a lasso over Dusty's neck. Carl rushed forward, throwing a dark cloth across the horse's eyes. Together grunting, they dragged him back into the trees. Dusty let out a weak, strangled whinny, stumbling as the drug seeped deeper into his blood. Behind the cabin, Elias froze mid-swing. His head jerked toward the sound hooves, scuffing branches snapping. Dusty, he called, axe clattering to the ground. He sprinted toward the tree line. The grass lay trampled, branches broken. The forest swallowed the echoes of struggle. All that remained was a faint trail in the dirt grooves where hooves had dragged, and at the edge of the clearing, one iron horseshoe, fresh polished, lying alone like a dropped coin. Elias picked it up, heart hammering. His hand clenched tight around the cold metal. His worst fear had arrived. When he returned to the cabin, breath-ragged, the sight that met him was a dagger to the gut. A knife quivered in the porch post, its blade sunk deep into the wood. Beneath it, impaled through the timber, fluttered a sheet of paper. He tore it free. The handwriting was bold, jagged, cruel. Bring the map and claim papers to the old sawmill by sundown. Come alone. If you don't, the horse dies." Beneath the words, scrawled heavy and uneven, was a single letter, M. Silas McGraw's mark. Elias crushed the paper in his fist. The fury that rose inside him was white-hot, searing away the tremor of fear. They could take gold land, even his blood. But they had laid hands on Dusty, the one creature that had stood between him and ruin. His jaw set. "You want the papers, McGraw," he muttered. "Then you'll choke on them." The plan took shape in minutes. Elias worked with soldier's precision, moving through the cabin like a man on campaign. He pulled up the loose stone behind the hearth, slid the true map and documents into a waxed pouch, and pressed them into the hollow, sealing them with resin to keep out damp. They would be safe there, even if fire took the cabin. Then he dragged an old valise from under the cot. Into it he stuffed bundles of newspaper, a couple of tattered ledgers with blank pages, and a roll of butcher paper hastily stained with ink smudges. From a distance, it might look like a bundle of ancient maps. Up close, it was nothing but smoke. But smoke could buy time. Before leaving, Elias rode hard into Oak Hollow. The church bell had just tolled noon when he entered the clapboard sanctuary. Clara Mayfield met him at the door, eyes widening at the storm written across his face. "They've taken Dusty," he said without preamble. "They mean to trade him for the map." "Sawmill at sundown." Clara drew in a breath. "Then you'll walk into their den." "I'll walk in," Elias replied grimly, but not blind. "If I hang a lantern at the mill 2 quick swings, that's your signal to know where Dusty is. 3 swings means fire." She pressed something small into his palm. A wax-sealed flare, the kind her family used to light, wet kindling. "For when there's no other way," she whispered. From there, Elias went straight to Sheriff Hanley. The lawman listened with eyes narrowed, stroking the gray whiskers at his chin. "We can't risk them panicking and shooting the horse," Hanley said. "But we'll have rifles in place. 2 men on the ridge facing the mill. You give the word Boone, and we'll rain thunder." They agreed on signals carried by the cry of an owl. 1 call meant Elias had arrived, 2 meant Dusty was located, 3 meant the time had come to strike. With that, Elias saddled up the false valise, lashed to his saddle horn. He rode into the deepening dusk, the ridge shadows lengthening like the fingers of a giant hand, closing over him. The sawmill sat like a carcass at the edge of a dry creek bed. Its timbers sagged, its tin roof rattled against the wind with a mournful clatter. Once it had hummed with saw blades and shouted orders. Now it crouched silent, a hollow shell of splinters and rust. Elias approached, slow lantern in hand. He paused at the wide doorway, struck the flame, and swung it twice. The signal burned golden against the dying sky before he set it down on the sill. His heart pounded so hard he could feel it in his throat. Shadows shifted inside. A voice oozed from the dark. "Well, Boone, you came after all." Silas McGraw emerged, broad-shouldered face, half hidden beneath the brim of his hat. On either side loomed Jed and Carl, their eyes sharp with triumph. High above, 2 armed men watched from the old catwalk rifles resting across the rails. In the corner of the mill stood a makeshift pen, its boards warped with age. Inside, Dusty swayed on his feet, head bound by rope, eyes glazed but alive. When he saw Elias, the horse let out a raw, trembling whinny that split the silence. Elias's throat tightened. He set the valise carefully on the floor, never taking his gaze off his horse. "I'm here," he said flatly. "Let him go." Silas's grin spread ugly and yellow. Now. Business first." He pointed with his chin. "Open the case." Elias bent, flicking the latches. He let the lid fall back, revealing the bundle of papers inside. Jed lunged forward, snatched them, and held them up. His eyes glittered with greed. "Got it," he crowed. Above an owl's cry floated on the air 2 calls. Sheriff Hanley had seen Dusty. Elias straightened, forcing calm into his voice. "You're making a mistake, McGraw. You think a deed in a map will save you in court? You forge a signature, they'll ask where it came from. How will you explain that?" Silas's eyes narrowed. "I've got friends who don't ask questions." He jerked his head toward the tree line, where the faint outline of a carriage lingered. Elias's stomach twisted when he glimpsed 2 figures within Caleb and Isabel, his own blood watching from the shadows. Elias clenched his jaw. Even family had joined hands with McGraw. Then from beyond the wall, he caught the faint scrape of cloth at the agreed signal. Clara had set her marker. Hanley's rifles were trained. Jed handed the bundle to Silas, who thumbed through the brittle pages oblivious to the smudged ink. At last the rancher breathed. "The ridge is mine." Elias cleared his throat softly, but deliberate the prearranged sound. Clara would know what it meant, stand ready. Now Silas said, lifting his hand toward the men near Dusty, "Release him." But Elias saw the twitch at the corner of his mouth, the lie coiling behind the words. Silas had no intention of honoring the deal. Elias's hand dropped to his pocket. "Hanley," he barked, smashing the flare against the oil-slicked boards. A gout of smoke and sparks billowed upward, filling the sawmill with acrid haze. An owl's cry split the dusk, 3 calls. Rifles cracked from the hillside, splinters raining down as the guards on the catwalk dove for cover. Jed lunged, blade flashing. Elias swung up an arm, catching him with a fistful of sawdust from the floor, driving grit into his eyes. Jed howled, staggering. Carl swung a rifle butt, but Elias twisted, dropping his weight low, then drove a boot into Carl's knee. The man went down with a scream weapon clattering away. Dusty screamed too, the sound wild and furious. Smoke swirled thick around his pen. With a thunderous crash, he drove his hooves into the boards, snapping them loose. He reared ropes, snapping from his head, and exploded forward. Jed, half-blinded, had just regained his balance when Dusty's shoulder slammed into him. He flew backward, crashing into a pile of timber. Carl scrambled, but the horse's hoof came down, kicking his rifle across the floor. Dusty Elias called, shoving through the haze. The horse barreled toward him, nostrils flared, mane wild. Elias caught hold of his neck, burying himself against the familiar warmth. Together they moved as one, weaving under the half-collapsed conveyor belt, smoke swirling to cover their retreat. A rifle cracked, but Sheriff's shot from outside snapped through the rafters, knocking debris down beside Silas. The rancher cursed, stumbling, as a beam crashed at his feet. His pistol skittered across the boards. By the time he scrambled upright, Dusty and Elias had disappeared into the haze. The fight collapsed quickly after that. Sheriff Hanley and 2 hastily deputized townsmen stormed through the doorway, rifles leveled. Jed lay groaning under the broken planks. Carl, clutching his leg, raised his hands in defeat. Silas McGraw was dragged forward, snarling as Hanley pressed iron cuffs onto his wrists. From the carriage, Clara appeared, her grip tight on a bundle of papers she had seized. Caleb and Isabel Boone stumbled behind her, pale as ghosts. Their hands shook as townsmen hauled them into the light. Clara raised the bundle, high telegrams and contracts, signed in Caleb's hand, bearing McGraw's seal. "Proof," she said, her voice steady. Hanley's eyes hardened. "That's all I need." Caleb's face drained white. Isabel turned her head, shame burning her cheeks. Their reputations crumbled with every word. Silas spat at the dirt. "You think this ends me?" Hanley shoved him toward the door. "It ends enough. The rest will let the law decide." The sawmill lay hushed when the smoke cleared. The rifles fell silent. Only the sigh of the pines and the groan of a broken rafter filled the air. Elias stood with Dusty in the open yard, one arm wrapped around the horse's neck, his cheek pressed against the warm hide. "I told you," he whispered, voice thick. "I'd come for you." Dusty blew out a heavy breath, his eyes half closed in weary relief. Clara stepped near her face, smeared with smoke, but lit with a small smile. Sheriff Hanley nodded once, rifle resting against his shoulder. "It's done, Boone. What comes after belongs to the courts." Elias looked past them to the ridge, its shadow tall against the fading sky. His father's words echoed again, "Hold the land. Do not yield it to greed." He stroked Dusty's mane, his voice low but firm. "The fight's not over. But the worst of it, that's behind us." And with the horse at his side, he believed it. The courthouse in the county seat was an austere stone building, its tall windows reflecting the pale winter sun. Elias Boone walked up its steps beside Sheriff Hanley, the weight of the satchel under his arm heavier than iron. Inside were the papers his father had hidden for decades. Mining surveys, land deeds, the old letter written in Abraham Boone's steady hand. Dusty stood tied outside the building, head high, as if sensing that something decisive was about to be sealed. The courtroom smelled of ink-oiled wood and dust. At the front, the county judge peered over his spectacles as Hanley laid the evidence before him. Clerks shuffled papers, whispering, then fell silent as the judge read aloud the key passages, descriptions of Blackthorn Ridge survey markers etched into rock, the claims staked under Abraham Boone's name. "This deed is clear," the judge declared, tapping the page. "And with the supporting survey, there is no question. Blackthorn Ridge and its mineral rights pass in full to his son, Elias Boone." A murmur rippled across the chamber. Some scoffed, others gasped. For years, the drifter had been the butt of Oak Hollow's jokes, the man who slouched at the end of the saloon bar. And now, the ridge rumored to hold wealth enough to change the fortunes of a county was his. The court bailiff opened the sacks that had been recovered from the mountain vault. Raw gold glinted in the light, crude nuggets and flecks piled into canvas bags. Gasps turned into silence, then into awe. Even the clerks froze, quills dangling uselessly in the air. Elias did not smile. He stood with hands behind his back shoulders, square gaze steady. "I will not sell the ridge," he said simply, "nor will I waste the gold. My father wrote that it was a burden, not a prize. I'll keep the land. I'll keep the Boone name clean." The judge nodded gravely. The words rang like an oath. Justice came swiftly for those who had threatened him. Silas McGraw was brought in chains, flanked by deputies, his once commanding frame sagging with defeat. The charges read out loud were many: conspiracy, attempted theft, kidnapping, attempted murder. Each word struck like a nail in a coffin. The trial lasted only 2 days. Witnesses spoke: Elias, Clara, Sheriff Hanley. Even the frightened Jed and Carl, who faced with long prison sentences, confessed every detail of Silas's orders. When the verdict was announced guilty on all counts, Silas's face twisted with rage. But there was no defiance in his eyes, only the dull recognition of a man who had lost everything. He was sentenced to decades in the state prison, shackled and led away, his boots scraping against the stone floor. Caleb and Isabel fared no better. The telegrams Clara had seized from their carriage revealed schemes inked in Caleb's hand, promises of gold advances, contracts signed with McGraw pledges to strip the ridge for every coin it could yield. Isabel's name appeared on loan documents, her reputation leveraged to funnel money eastward. They could not deny it. Partners withdrew their support overnight. Investors tore up agreements. Isabel's husband's family, humiliated, cast her out. Word spread quickly in Oak Hollow. The wealthy Boone siblings, once admired, were now disgraced. At the Golden Spur, where Elias had once been mocked for failing to pay his tab, the talk was different now. Men shook their heads and muttered that perhaps they had misjudged him. A few even tipped their hats when he passed, though Elias neither gloated nor sought their approval. When asked about Caleb and Isabel, he said only, "Each man and woman lives with the choices they make." The gold could have made him the richest man in 3 states. He could have built mansions, purchased rail stock, lorded over Oak Hollow with more power than Silas had ever dreamed. But Elias remembered the words in his father's letter. "Gold is not a reward, but a burden. Hold the land. Protect it from the greedy." So he sold a portion of the gold, enough to fund what was needed, but not enough to feed further envy. With it, he hired carpenters to repair the sagging bridge over the creek, replacing rotted planks with strong beams that could bear wagon loads of timber. He paid masons to raise stone footings so floods would no longer wash it away each spring. Farmers crossing with carts of hay tipped their hats to him in gratitude. Next, he opened a modest supply station, its shelves stocked with tools, flour beans, and coffee. He put a sign above its door, "Credit for veterans and their families." No soldier who had limped home from the war would be turned away for lack of coin. Word spread, and soon men with worn uniforms and hollow eyes found their way to Oak Hollow, receiving provisions without shame. He gave funds to the small schoolhouse where a single teacher had once struggled to teach 30 children, with only a few battered primers. New slates, chalk, and books arrived from the city. For the first time, the children of Oak Hollow learned letters and numbers with pride instead of embarrassment. The people began to speak of him differently. Not Elias the drifter, not Boone the failure. They called him Boone the guardian. 6 months passed. Spring unfurled across the ridge, wildflowers pushing up through thawed soil streams, tumbling clear and cold down from the mountain. The cabin, once a sagging ruin, had been remade. Elias rebuilt it with his own hands, plank by plank, nail by nail, the rhythm of labor soothing his restless mind. Neighbors lent hammers and saws, and some once skeptical now joined in offering their time as repayment for his quiet generosity. When the work was done, the cabin stood strong against the wind roof, shingled tight porch, wide and sturdy. Above its door hung a carved sign of polished oak, "Boone's Rest," for the weary and the lost. Travelers soon began stopping there. Teamsters on long routes, shepherds driving flocks, men drifting after war's end. They found a place to sit by the fire, a bowl of stew, and the steady presence of Elias Boone, who asked for nothing but honesty in return. Clara Mayfield often visited, bringing flowers she set in jars upon the windowsill, her laughter warming the rooms more than the fire. Old Jeremiah came by too, resting on the porch with Dusty at his side, telling children stories of the mines of the ridge in days long past. The cabin was no longer a symbol of exile. It had become a beacon. One evening, as the sun sank low, painting Oak Hollow Valley in gold, Elias stood on the porch of Boone's Rest. His hand rested lightly against Dusty's neck, fingers sinking into the thick mane. The horse snorted softly, ears flicking toward the sounds of children laughing somewhere in the distance. The view stretched far and wide, green fields stitched with fences, the faint curl of smoke from chimneys, the gleam of the river threading through the valley. Once Elias had seen only shadows here. Now he saw life. He was no longer the man hunched in a saloon corner, drowning memory in cheap whiskey. He was no longer the soldier haunted by failure. He was the keeper of land, of honor, of his father's trust. "Looks like we found our place, old friend," he murmured. Dusty lifted his head, let out a quiet whinny, and shook his mane as if in agreement. Elias smiled, the lines of hardship softening on his face. For the first time in years, peace settled into his chest. Not the peace of forgetfulness, but the peace of a man who had faced his trials and stood firm. Together, they gazed out over Oak Hollow, guardians of a ridge that would stand long after both had gone. A ridge no longer cursed by secrecy or greed, but blessed by the strength of those who chose to protect